I still remember the exact moment my world tilted off its axis. It was Tuesday, October 15th at 2:47 p.m. in the sterile conference room of Hartwell & Associates on Main Street in Austin. The Texas heat outside was suffocating even for mid-October, but inside that room I felt ice cold. My grandfather, William Bill Thompson, had built Thompson Construction from nothing into one of the largest commercial building companies in Central Texas. 53 years of blood, sweat, and concrete had made him a millionaire several times over. When he passed 3 weeks ago at 81, we all knew there would be a substantial inheritance to discuss. What we didn't know was that a complete stranger would walk away with everything. The entirety of my estate, including Thompson Construction, all real estate holdings, investments, and personal assets, valued at approximately $12.3 million, I leave to Isabel Martinez. Attorney Richard Hartwell's voice echoed in the suddenly silent room. My cousin Tyler's coffee cup slipped from his hands, shattering against the polished wooden table. My Aunt Patricia made a choking sound. My mother's face went paper white. Isabel Martinez. None of us had ever heard that name before. I looked around the table at my family: 5 grandchildren, 3 children, 2 daughters-in-law who'd been married into the family for over 30 years. We'd all expected to inherit something. The company alone was worth $8 million. Grandpa Bill had worked his entire life, starting as a day laborer mixing cement under the scorching Texas sun, eventually employing over 200 people across Austin, San Antonio, and Houston. "I'm sorry," my mother finally managed to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you say Isabel Martinez? Who is Isabel Martinez?" Hartwell adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, clearly uncomfortable. He'd been the family lawyer for 20 years, had drafted 3 previous versions of Grandpa's will. Each time, everything had been divided among the family. "I don't have any additional information about Ms. Martinez beyond what's stated in the will," he said carefully. "Your father was very specific about this change, which was made 6 months ago. He came in alone, was of sound mind, and insisted on these exact terms." The room erupted. Tyler stood up so fast his chair toppled backward. "This is insane. 6 months ago? What happened 6 months ago? Grandpa didn't mention anyone named Isabel to any of us." My Aunt Patricia was crying now, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. 50 years I've been part of this family. 50 years. Richard, there has to be some mistake. Bill would never. "There's no mistake," Hartwell said firmly. "I advised him extensively about this decision. We discussed it over 3 separate meetings. He was adamant. I sat there in stunned silence trying to process what this meant. Isabel Martinez now owned the construction company my grandfather had built from scratch. She owned his house, the sprawling ranch-style home on Lake Travis where we'd spent countless family holidays. She owned his boat, his vintage Chevy truck collection, his stock portfolio, everything. But who was she? "Mr. Hartwell," I said, finding my voice, "surely there's some information about how to contact this woman? She needs to know about her inheritance." "Ms. Martinez has already been contacted. She'll be attending a meeting here tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss the transfer of assets. If any of you would like to be present." The words hung in the air. Of course we'd be there. We needed answers. As we filed out of the office into the suffocating Austin heat, nobody spoke. The sky was that particular shade of orange-pink that Texas gets in October, beautiful and harsh at the same time. Cars honked on the busy street, life continuing normally while our world had just imploded. 6 months ago, my mother said suddenly as we reached our cars. "What happened 6 months ago?" I thought back. 6 months ago was April. Grandpa had seemed normal, then still driving himself to the office every morning at 7 a.m., still wearing his signature cowboy boots and bolo tie, still complaining about the younger generation not knowing how to work with their hands. But now that I thought about it, there had been something different. He'd been making more phone calls, stepping outside to take them. He'd mentioned going to Houston more frequently for business meetings. When I'd offered to drive him, he declined, saying he preferred to handle certain matters personally. "We need to find out who Isabel Martinez is," Tyler said, his jaw clenched. "This doesn't make sense." Grandpa was sharp as a tack. Someone had to have influenced him, convinced him somehow. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Austin, past the University of Texas campus where I'd graduated, past the construction sites that bore Thompson Construction signs, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I thought I knew about my grandfather was wrong. The man who had taught me to drive a stick shift in his old Ford pickup, who had taken me fishing on Lake Travis every summer, who had insisted family came first above everything else, that man wouldn't have left his entire life's work to a stranger. which meant Isabel Martinez wasn't really a stranger at all. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Hartwell's voice repeating those words, "Everything goes to Isabel Martinez." I kept thinking about Grandpa's last few months, searching for clues I might have missed. The next morning I arrived at Hartwell and Associates 30 minutes early. The October sun was already blazing, promising another scorching day. Inside the air-conditioned office building, I found my family gathered in the same conference room, everyone looking as shell-shocked as I felt. Tyler was pacing by the windows, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled shirt. Patricia sat rigidly in her chair, her purse clutched in her lap like a shield. My mother stared at the table, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd slept as poorly as I had. "Any of you figure out who she might be?" Tyler asked without preamble. "I went through all of Dad's papers last night," Mom said quietly. "His address book, his phone records, his calendar. No Isabel Martinez anywhere." "What about the business? Maybe she worked for the company?" Patricia suggested. I shook my head. "I called our HR manager this morning. No Isabel Martinez has ever been employed by Thompson Construction. Not in Austin, not in San Antonio, not in Houston." The door opened and Hartwell entered with a woman behind him. My breath caught. Isabel Martinez was probably in her mid-40s, with shoulder-length dark hair streaked with silver and kind brown eyes. She wore a simple navy dress and looked nervous, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She was attractive in an understated way, but what struck me most was how normal she seemed. This wasn't the gold-digging manipulator I'd imagined. "Good morning, everyone," Hartwell said. "I'd like you to meet Isabel Martinez." She nodded at us, her eyes taking in each face around the table. When she spoke, her voice carried a slight accent Mexican-American, probably born in Texas but with Spanish as her first language. "I want to say how sorry I am for your loss," she said. "I know this must be very confusing and painful for all of you." Tyler stepped forward, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Confusing doesn't begin to cover it, Ms. Martinez. We've never heard your name before yesterday. So maybe you can explain to us exactly who you are and why our grandfather left you everything." Isabel's composure wavered slightly but she maintained eye contact. "I understand your feelings. If I were in your position I'd want answers too." "Then give us some," Patricia said sharply. Isabel looked at Hartwell, who nodded encouragingly. She took a deep breath before speaking. "Your grandfather, Mr. Thompson, he saved my life." The room went dead silent. Outside, I could hear the distant hum of Austin traffic, but inside, we were all holding our breath. "I was working as a night shift nurse at Brackenridge Hospital 6 months ago," she continued. "It was April 20th, about 2 a.m. I was walking to my car in the parking garage after my shift when 2 men tried to rob me. One of them had a knife." My mother's hand flew to her throat. "Mr. Thompson was leaving the hospital. He'd been visiting someone, I think. He saw what was happening and intervened. The men ran off but not before one of them slashed his arm pretty badly. I treated his wound in the ER. I remembered that night. Grandpa had called me around 3 a.m., asking me to pick him up from the hospital. He'd said he'd had a minor accident and needed stitches. When I'd pressed for details, he'd been vague, saying he'd cut himself on some metal at a construction site. After that night, he started visiting me regularly," Isabel continued. "Just to check on me," he said. "Make sure I was okay. We talked during my breaks. He was lonely, I think. He told me about the company, about all of you, about how proud he was of his family. If he was so proud of us, why didn't he leave us anything?" Tyler demanded. Isabel's eyes filled with tears. "Because he knew you didn't need it." The words hit like a physical blow. Tyler's face flushed red. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "Tyler," my mother warned. But Isabel held up her hand. "It's okay. I know how this looks. A stranger walking away with everything you expected to inherit. But Mr. Thompson, Bill, he researched all of you. He knew Tyler owns 3 successful restaurants. He knew Patricia's husband left her very well provided for. He knew your mother has her teaching pension and the insurance money from your father's death." She turned to me. "He knew you have a good job at the engineering firm, that you're doing well for yourself. He was proud of all of you for building your own lives, for not depending on his money. But you do need it?" I asked, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. Isabel nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'm a single mother. My daughter, Sophia, is 16. She's brilliant. Straight A's, wants to be a doctor. But I worked 2 jobs just to keep up with rent and groceries. College seemed impossible until..." She gestured around the room. "Bill set up a trust. The money is specifically designated for Sophia's education medical school, everything. The house and the business, he wanted me to sell them and use the proceeds to establish a scholarship fund for other kids like Sophia. Kids whose parents work multiple jobs but still can't afford college. The silence stretched on. I found myself staring at this woman, this stranger who was apparently going to carry on my grandfather's legacy in a way none of us had expected. He never told any of you about me because he knew you'd try to talk him out of it, Isabel said softly. He said his family was successful and strong, that you'd be fine. But there were other people who needed help more. Hartwell cleared his throat. Ms. Martinez, why don't you tell them about the letters? Isabel reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. Bill wrote letters. One for each of you. He wanted you to understand his decision. She handed them out, one for Mom, one for Patricia, one for Tyler, one for me. My name was written on the envelope in Grandpa's familiar handwriting. With shaking fingers, I opened mine and began to read. Dear Michael, if you're reading this, then Isabel has told you about how we met. I hope you'll understand why I kept our friendship private. I knew if I mentioned her, you'd all assume the worst, that an old man was being taken advantage of by a younger woman. But that wasn't the case at all. Son, I've watched you grow into a fine man. You graduated from UT with honors, you've built a good career, you own your own home. You're everything I hoped you'd become when you were that scrawny kid following me around construction sites, asking a million questions about how buildings stay up. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of all my grandchildren. But that pride is exactly why I made this decision. 6 months ago, when Isabel treated my wound at the hospital, she mentioned her daughter's dreams of becoming a doctor. This young woman was working double shifts, sending every spare dollar to help her aging parents in San Antonio, and still trying to save for her daughter's future. She reminded me of myself at that age, determined, hardworking, but fighting an uphill battle. I started visiting her regularly because I saw something in her that reminded me of your grandmother, God rest her soul. The same strength, the same selflessness. Isabel never once asked me for anything. In fact, when I first mentioned wanting to help with Sophia's education, she refused. It took months to convince her to let me set up a small college fund. It wasn't until I learned more about her story that I made my final decision. Isabel came to this country when she was 8 years old. Her parents worked in the fields around San Antonio, saving every penny to send her to school. She put herself through nursing school, working 3 jobs. She's exactly the kind of person this country needs more of. Michael, you don't need my money. You've already proven you can build your own success. But Isabel's daughter, Sophia, and thousands of kids like her, they need a chance. They need someone to believe in them the way I believed in you when I taught you to work with your hands. Thompson Construction will continue under Isabel's management until she can find the right buyer. I've spoken with our foreman, Roberto, and he's agreed to help with the transition. The business will keep providing jobs for our employees while Isabel figures out the best way to honor my wishes. I know you're hurt. I know this feels like a betrayal. But I need you to understand this isn't about loving you any less. This is about loving more people. This is about using what I built to build something bigger. There's one more thing. In my safe at home, there's a box marked with your name. I've left each of you something personal, not money, but things that matter more. Your grandmother's ring is in there, the one she always said should go to the first grandchild to get married. I still hope that'll be you someday. Take care of your mother for me. And try to find it in your heart to understand why an old man wanted to spend his final act in this world lifting up someone who needed lifting. I love you, son. Grandpa Bill. I looked up from the letter to find everyone else still reading, tears streaming down faces around the table. Isabel sat quietly, her hands folded, giving us space to process. Tyler finished first, his jaw working as he folded his letter and set it on the table. He mentions the restaurant's financial troubles last year. I remembered. Tyler's flagship restaurant had nearly gone under during the pandemic. He'd been too proud to ask for help, had worked 18-hour days to save it. He knew. Tyler asked Isabel. She nodded. He kept track of all of you. He was worried about you during that time, but he said you were too stubborn to accept help. He was proud when you turned things around on your own. Patricia looked up from her letter, mascara streaking her cheeks. He says he knew about my volunteer work at the women's shelter. How did he know about that? He asked, Isabel said simply. He cared about what you were doing with your lives. He just didn't want to interfere. My mother was the last to finish reading. When she looked up, her eyes were red but calmer than they'd been since yesterday. Mom? I asked gently. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. He says he knew I never really wanted the business. That I stayed in Austin all these years because I felt obligated to be near the company, but that my heart was always in teaching. It was true. Mom had taught elementary school for 30 years before retiring, and she'd loved every minute of it. She'd only stayed involved with Thompson Construction out of a sense of family duty. He wants me to travel, she continued, her voice breaking. Says there's a small account he set up for me to see Europe like I always talked about. He knew I never felt free to spend money on myself. Hartwell spoke up. Mrs. Thompson, that account is separate from the main estate. Each of you has a personal account set up, not large sums, but enough for what he felt each of you most wanted. Tyler slumped back in his chair. So he was watching us. All this time he was watching and planning. He loved you, Isabel said softly. That's why he planned so carefully. He wanted to make sure everyone was taken care of, his family and mine. I found myself studying Isabel's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But all I saw was genuine emotion and exhaustion. She looked like a woman who'd been carrying a heavy secret for months. Can I ask you something? I said. Of course. Why didn't you try to talk him out of it? When you realized what he was planning. This inheritance, it's going to change your life completely. Isabel was quiet for a long moment. I did try. When he first told me about the will change, I begged him to reconsider. I told him his family should come first. But he said something that stayed with me. She paused, looking around the table at each of us. He said, Isabel, I spent 50 years building something for my family. Now I want to spend what time I have left building something for everyone's family. He said the greatest gift he could give his grandchildren was showing them that success meant lifting others up, not just accumulating wealth. The room fell silent again. Outside, I could hear the sounds of Austin coming alive for the day, cars honking, construction equipment rumbling, the city my grandfather had helped build continuing to grow. There's something else, Isabel said hesitantly. Something he made me promise to tell you. We all looked at her expectantly. He was sick. The words hit like a punch to the gut. What do you mean sick? My mother asked, her voice barely audible. Isabel looked at Hartwell, who nodded grimly. Your father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in March. Stage 4. He had maybe 6 months left. The conference room spun around me. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months. That meant. He knew he was dying when he changed the will, Tyler said, his voice hollow. Yes, Isabel confirmed. He didn't want any of you to know because he didn't want to spend his last months watching you worry. He said he wanted to handle his affairs quietly and let you remember him as he was. My mother made a strangled sound and covered her face with her hands. Patricia reached over and put an arm around her shoulders. But he died of a heart attack, I protested. The doctors said. The cancer was weakening his heart, Hartwell explained. Dr. Richard said it was actually a blessing, a quick end instead of months of suffering. I thought back to those last months with Grandpa. He had seemed tired, but I'd attributed it to his age. There had been moments when he'd seemed unusually sentimental, taking longer to say goodbye after family dinners, hugging us a little tighter. I thought he was just getting older, more emotional. He'd been saying goodbye. Why are you telling us this now? Tyler asked Isabel. Because he made me promise to tell you after you'd read the letters. He wanted you to understand that his decision wasn't impulsive or the result of manipulation. He had time to think, and he chose to spend his final months making sure his legacy would help as many people as possible. Isabel pulled another envelope from her purse. There's one more letter. He wrote it for all of you together. She handed it to my mother, who opened it with shaking hands and began to read aloud. My dear family, if Isabel is reading you this letter, then she's told you about my illness. I know you're probably angry with me for keeping it secret, but I hope you'll understand my reasons. I've lived 81 good years. I built a business, raised a family, and got to see my grandchildren grow into wonderful adults. Not everyone gets that gift. But these last months, watching Isabel work 2 jobs to support her family while still finding time to visit an old man in the hospital, reminded me that there are people fighting battles every day without the advantages I was blessed with. I want you to know that leaving you the business and the money would have been the easy choice. It's what everyone expected, including me, for most of my life. But easy choices don't change the world. Tyler, I've watched you work harder than any man should have to just to keep your dreams alive. That strength you have, that refusal to give up, that's what I want my legacy to represent. Not the money I accumulated, but the determination I passed down. Patricia, your work at the women's shelter matters more than you know. You're already changing lives every day. I'm proud of you for using your comfortable life to help others find comfort. Margaret, my daughter, You gave up your own dreams to help me build this company when your mother died. You sacrificed travel, adventure, new experiences. That ends now. See the world. You've earned it. Michael, you're the one who's most like me, and that's why I know you'll understand this decision eventually. You see how things are built, how they work, what makes them strong. This foundation I'm leaving, it's not made of money. It's made of opportunity. Help Isabel build something lasting with it. I need you all to know, this inheritance isn't a rejection of you. It's an investment in the kind of people I raised you to be. The kind of people who understand that real wealth comes from what you build for others, not what you accumulate for yourself. Thompson Construction put food on our table for 3 generations. Now I wanted to put college educations within reach for kids whose parents never had that chance. I wanted to fund scholarships, to help other Isabel Martinez's get their daughters through medical school, to prove that the American dream is still possible for people willing to work for it. I'm not asking you to be happy about this decision. I'm asking you to help make it work. Isabel is going to need guidance transitioning the business. Sophia is going to need mentors as she pursues her education. This family has always been about more than blood, it's been about values. Show them what Thompson values look like. I love you all more than you'll ever know. Take care of each other. And take care of Isabel and Sophia too. They're family now. Dad/Grandpa Bill. The silence that followed was different from the shocked quiet of yesterday. This was the silence of understanding, of pieces falling into place, of anger slowly transforming into something else. Tyler was the first to speak. Cancer, he said, shaking his head. All those times I complained about him being distant lately. He didn't want pity, Isabel said. He wanted to spend his time doing something meaningful. Helping my daughter was meaningful to him. I looked at this woman who'd inherited my grandfather's life's work, and for the first time I didn't see a stranger. I saw someone my grandfather had chosen, someone he'd trusted to carry forward his values. Isabel, I said, you're going to need help managing the business transition. She nodded, looking overwhelmed. I'm an engineer. I understand construction. If you're serious about doing this right, about honoring his wishes, I paused, surprised by my own words. I'd like to help. Tyler looked at me, then at Isabel. My restaurants donate leftover food to shelters every week. When you set up that scholarship fund, I want to contribute. Patricia wiped her eyes. I know kids at the women's shelter who could use those scholarships. Kids whose mothers are starting over, trying to build better lives. My mother folded the letter carefully and looked at Isabel. What was my father like in those last months? Was he happy? Isabel smiled for the first time since entering the room. He was proud. So proud of all of you. He'd show me pictures on his phone, Tyler's restaurants, Patricia's volunteer work, Michael's engineering projects, your teaching awards. He said his greatest accomplishment wasn't building a successful business. It was raising children and grandchildren who were good people. She paused, her voice growing soft. And yes, he was happy. He felt like he was finally doing something that would outlast him. The buildings he constructed will eventually be torn down, but the education he's funding will keep building new generations. As we prepared to leave the conference room, I realized something had shifted. Yesterday I'd lost an inheritance. Today I'd gained a purpose. Isabel, I said as we gathered our things, would you like to get coffee sometime this week? You're going to need to understand the business operations, and I'd like to learn more about these scholarship plans. She smiled, and I could see some of the tension leaving her shoulders. I'd like that very much. Outside in the Austin heat, my family stood together on the sidewalk. The anger was gone, replaced by something harder to define: sadness, pride, and a strange sense of anticipation. You know what the old man did, don't you? Tyler said, squinting in the bright sunlight. What? I asked. He made sure we'd all become better people. Even after he's gone, he's still teaching us lessons. I looked back at the office building where Isabel was still meeting with Hartwell, probably overwhelmed by the magnitude of what lay ahead. In a few months, she'd be running a multi-million-dollar company and managing scholarship funds that would change dozens of lives. But she wouldn't be doing it alone. Whether Grandpa had planned it or not, he'd created something bigger than an inheritance. He'd created a new kind of family, bound together not by blood but by shared values and a common purpose. As I drove home through the streets of Austin, past the construction sites and buildings that bore my grandfather's legacy, I realized he'd gotten exactly what he wanted. He'd built something that would last. Not just buildings or businesses, but a foundation for lifting others up. The will reading had ended with, "Everything goes to her." But everything, it turned out, was just the beginning. 3 months later, The William Thompson Scholarship Fund awarded its first grants to 27 students across Texas. Sofia Martinez was accepted to UT's pre-med program with a full scholarship. Tyler's Restaurants began hosting monthly fundraising dinners for the scholarship fund. Patricia started a mentorship program connecting scholarship recipients with successful women in their chosen fields. My mother booked a trip to Italy for the spring. And me? I took a leave of absence from my engineering firm to help Isabel transition Thompson Construction into a company that builds both buildings and futures. It wasn't the inheritance I'd expected, but it was the legacy my grandfather always intended. Sometimes the best gifts are the ones that change not just your life, but your understanding of what life should be about.